Do you ever wonder how to draw people with more looseness and freedom instead of making them look like you just copied a model or an image from the internet? Well, in this episode, I do my best to describe some approaches that I use to do just that. Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're well. I hope you guys have been having a great week or day or month or whatever it's been since we last talked or since you last checked in with yourself to find out what length of time has passed since you last thought about time. My name's Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and designer in Vancouver, British Columbia, and you're watching the Making Friends vidcast where I answer your questions about illustration. So you may have noticed I have been absent. I did not post an episode on Monday, my usual day for posting. And that's because I realized last week, after recording for the first time since June, I took the summer off. I realized how much of my day recording these things takes and editing them and posting them. And it really threw off my day. It really threw me off that day. And I had a hard time feeling like I accomplished anything in terms of my client work. So I've decided to be a little more casual about my schedule and record these when I have the time, when there's a window. And I know that's not as ideal as having a predictable time to post, and it's probably going to hurt me in some ways in terms of getting this podcast out there, and some of you guys might not like it, but this is the compromise I'm going to have to make in order to make it work at all. So anyway, thank you for your patience while I delayed in getting this to you, and thank you so much for watching. So as usual, I'm going to jump into my chit chat where I just talk about things that are on my mind. And then after that, I have a great question to answer and talk about in some detail. So while you're waiting for me to post new episodes here answering your questions, I wanted to point out to you guys that there's a great new podcast out there called The Nose Knows. It's by John Contino. John Contino is a designer and illustrator in Brooklyn, and you probably have heard of him. If you haven't, check him out. John Contino. I'll leave a link here in the info. And he has a fantastic podcast. He's up to maybe 5 or 6 episodes, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. And it's the same premise as this podcast, or as this vidcast, where he's answering questions that come into him through email or whatever. And he and his intern, Brent, discuss these things kind of in a casual setting. It's really fun to listen to. They're total naturals, and I think John is really great at just answering questions and delivering his thoughts. He's a great speaker, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So I just wanted to share a few things that I'm working on right now, just to keep you updated on what's happening with my life. I am about to, or in the process of collaborating with Cathy Terepocki. She's a local ceramics wizard who makes beautiful products for home and also jewelry. She makes these beautiful ceramic planters, beautiful mugs, beautiful earrings. Everything she makes is beautiful. She's even done a product line with Anthropology, and she happens to live just down the road from me here in this tiny town we live in. And anyway, I'm lucky to be collaborating with her right now on kind of Cathy Terepocki times Tom Froese line of products, kind of experimental for both of us. She's never worked with an illustrator before, and I've never worked with ceramics before, so it's going to be really fun. Another thing I'm working on is a line of products for a Vancouver-based ice cream shop. They have a few things that they're going to be selling in retail stores, and they've been really great about giving me a lot of creative freedom and getting my illustrations on the front of their labels. So I'm enjoying that, and I'm looking forward to sharing a bit of those soon. I also just wanted to share with you some things that I'm excited about. Since the summer, and I think I talked about this in previous episodes, I started sketching. I started actually just drawing, ideally mostly from life every day in my sketchbook, and just letting that be a place where I work things out that I don't have to share online. But of course, I have been sharing some of it on my drawing Instagram feed called Drawing is Important. And when I haven't really felt like drawing from life, for whatever reason, sometimes I just don't have the patience for it. I'll just sketch and doodle and see what happens. So I've been really excited about this sketchbook, which is a Moleskine kind of watercolor sketchbook. It's the vertical format, which I prefer to their kind of horizontal format watercolor sketchbooks, because I find that other format awkward. But yeah, I've just really have been enjoying doing random sketches, drawings in this, and it's fun having a place where I'm dedicated to just exploring and not worried about what I'm sharing. And I'm sharing some of this now just to show you guys because I'm excited about it, but having a lot of fun just playing around with stuff, experimenting with stretching my style, and mixing different kinds of media. I've been really enjoying these markers called permapaque. They're opaque markers. They're kind of expensive, so I just bought 3 to start: pink, white, and black. And I don't know if you can see that there, but what I like about them is that they're opaque. So it's almost like working with gouache. You can paint a color like the white over top the black and it shows up. And that's really kind of cool. So just drawing some bathers there, and then some horses and weirdos. Anyway, excited about sketchbooking, doing some cutouts. Stole my kids' markers to do this one. So why am I showing you that? Sketchbooking is a really great way to be creative and not have to worry about the pressures of what to share online. But at the same time, every now and then I'll post something that I'm excited about and write a little bit about that. And that's on my Instagram account, Drawing is Important. So coming up, just some goings-ons in my world here. On Thursday, that's September 27th, I'm doing a pop-up shop at Shop Bureau, which is a brand new kind of housewares and accessories and apothecary and kid stuff. Really beautiful, well-curated shop in Abbotsford, which is the neighboring city to where I am in BC. And I'll be selling some of my products there and signing some copies of Whose Boat, which is my first illustrated book. And Shop Bureau carries that book. So if you're in the Fraser Valley and you want to come and meet me, come say hi. I will be participating in what's called the Abbotsford or Abbey Wine and Art Walk. And Shop Bureau will be hosting me there with a tiny little pop-up shop. And I'll be happy to meet anyone who comes by. So also in November, I will be guest lecturing at Western Washington University. This is a program headed by Keith Negley, who's an amazing illustrator out of Bellingham. And so I'll be excited to be sharing some of my story there and my evolution as an illustrator to the students there. So I don't think that's that's not an open invitation, but just kind of something I'm looking forward to. And I always love guest lecturing. If you ever need a guy to talk about illustration for an hour, let me know. I'm always interested in those opportunities. So Now let's jump into the question. This question comes from someone named Chanel. She asked me this back in probably in August, and I've been sitting on the question waiting for the time to talk about it. And here we are. This is the time I'd like to talk about it. Let's just read the question. How do I loosen up when drawing people? How can I draw them so it looks like it came intuitively from heart versus from a real image or life model? So I get this question a lot. I've seen it come up a lot. I've heard it come up a lot in podcasts and stuff like that. And I think it's just a perennial, it's kind of like the style question. It's one of the holy grails of illustration. How do you develop a style to draw people? And how do you draw people with more fluidity and character and make them look elevated in some way? So drawing people for illustrators is a super important tool to have in our toolkit. It's inevitable that we're going to have to draw people in our careers at some point. I avoided it for a long time until one day I had got a project and I had to illustrate like hundreds of people. And at that point, I decided now is the time to start working on a way of drawing people in a more concerted and conscious way. But at the root of the question, I think, is how do we draw people? Do we draw them more in a more abstract way or more realistically? So I think that's one of the first questions we have to ask ourselves. How do we want to draw people, or how do we need to draw people? And that's often a function of how that person is supposed to function in the illustration. Is the person just a stand-in for a bigger idea, or is the illustration really about that person, and more detail is required in that person, including things like facial expression, even whether it's ethnicity or gender, hair color, clothing styles. So there's a sort of range of detail that you may or may not need to get into when drawing people. And part of this is something you can consider job to job, and part of this is something you can consider for yourself as an illustrator, like how you actually use people in your illustration. If you know my work, I use people a lot, I draw people a lot, and there is a lot of character in them, and they're often the focal point of the illustration. And that hasn't always been so. I have previously been very uncomfortable drawing people because I would try and draw them anatomically correct, but also in a way that was stylistically interesting. And it took me a lot of time, and it felt like I was relying very heavily on images or models and photos to draw the people. And so there was always sort of a stiff and starchiness about the people. Like they seemed rigid and in many cases awkward. And although I like having awkwardness as a deliberate element in my work, this kind of awkwardness was really that kind of unforgivable awkwardness that comes from just not knowing what else to do. So that's just one question we need to ask, like, what is the function of drawing people here? And I think with the person asking this question, I think she's just talking more in general. Like she actually gave me a reference image of illustrations or drawings of a woman, kind of iterations of this woman in different gestures, and they're very loose. And she is kind of anatomically realistic, but things are really stylized about her. Like her hips are super big and her torso is really small and her head is tiny, and her limbs are very rubbery. So there's definitely a style added to it. And so I guess in her case, it's about just how to draw more expressive figures kind of outside of how they function in an editorial illustration, say. So another question I ask is, how can we draw a more abstract or stylized person without being cartoony? Because I think you can go too far one way and it's going to be super cartoony and it's going to look cheesy or not elevated enough for the kind of work you want to be doing. But if you go too far the other way, it ends up being too overthought, overwrought, overdrawn. So you want to find that nice sweet spot between something that has a freedom to it and a kind of whimsy to it without it being so simplified that it just looks cartoony. So for me, I practice, or the way I see how to go about this, how to go about drawing people in a more loosened up way is first just practice by actually drawing from life or from gestures or from photos. And in this way, you'll study gestures and proportions. And it's that classic saying of you need to know the rules to break the rules. And the classic mythical example used is Picasso. We see his Cubist style paintings where people are very stylized and broken apart, not realistic at all. But we also know that if we look at Picasso's sketches or earlier drawings or earlier paintings, he was a fantastic draftsman and knew actually how to draw people in proportion and anatomically correct. So you need to know the rules to break the rules. So draw people realistically, go to life drawing classes, draw from reference images, take photos of yourself in various poses that you need to learn or draw. And in this way, you're studying, you're kind of downloading information about the human body and how it works, and you're internalizing that. While you're doing this, don't draw with the pretense of a style. Just let it come out as you do. Just absorb the raw information by drawing. Stylization in one way happens in the translation of what you see or know about the human body to what you draw on the page. So there's a translation between you studying or drawing or making sense of what you see, like you're thinking about proportion, for instance. And then when you draw that on the page, there's something that happens in that translation, so in that crossover from brain to hand, if you will. And a lot of that is just accidental. It's often based on your weaknesses or your inabilities to draw certain things like a straight line or a curve in a certain way. And that becomes a part of your style in a large way. And the more intuitively you make that translation, the more style you put into your drawing. So let's just say at first you're just drawing people and you're really trying to get things exactly the way you see it as much as possible. So just inherent in that, there's going to be some style. But at this point, maybe it's very studied and overworked. But over time, when you go to draw someone in a certain pose or a gesture or doing a certain action, you'll use less of what you see and more of either what you feel or what you know in making that drawing. And the way you do that, the way you interpret your understanding of the human figure without looking at it, that is in a large way just your natural style. And I'll speak more to that in a minute. Okay, so if you're drawing people intuitively or from your head, it has to come from somewhere. Of course, it'll come from an image in your head, or it will come from what you know about how the hip connects to the pelvis or those kinds of things. But I think when drawing and thinking about how to draw with more of that flowiness or that looseness, you really need to have a feeling about that. And I'm not quite sure how best to communicate the idea of that feeling, but it's just a sense of what to draw next and where. And the more you kind of home into that feeling and get better at listening to that feeling, the better you become at letting that guide you in your drawing. Maybe another way of putting it is, let's just say if I'm trying to draw someone skiing, okay, I had to do a whole bunch of skiers recently. I can look at images of skiers and draw from those, which I do. Or I might want to just think about how someone crouches. So I'll actually like just not even like take a picture of myself, but I'll kind of make the skiing like let's just say I want someone skiing downhill. I don't know if you can see me in the camera here. So if I want to get a feeling for someone like kind of crouched up in a goofy way, in an exaggerated way, I might just do that with my body and feel it. I want to feel where my hands are. I want to feel where my knees are. And of course, I'm going to look at it too. I might take a picture. But the more important thing is how I feel doing that gesture. And I, I, I can only speak for myself, but I think that most people can see by feeling their body. Like if you did a certain gesture, you could in some to some extent translate how you feel about that gesture to what how you see about that. And that might take a bit of practice. For me, that actually comes quite naturally. Ever since I've been drawing seriously, I've this has just been a part of my process. Is just doing the weird thing that I think I want to draw and feeling it, or imagining me doing it even. And maybe that's unique to me. I don't know. Uh, but I often try and get that feeling versus what I know or see. And that feeling is what I put into my work a lot. And that's maybe a clue as to how I get personality and feeling into my work. So when you use what I'm calling intuition, you use a combination of logic and feeling to draw out a person or a gesture. So I might have a feeling like I just showed you with my skiing example, but then I'll also use logic in terms of like, okay, I know the shoulder kind of connects near the head. I don't really need to see the other shoulder, but I might see the elbow poking out the back. And so that's why I'm just using logic about like, okay, well, if the line starts here, it's going to end out back here, and I can draw that line. I mean, in a very simple sense, like let's just go back to the skiing example. I know that the back of the head can kind of just be like the back of the head, the back, and the bottom of my bum can all just be kind of one curvy line. And that's a combination of feeling, but also of logic. Like if I'm simplifying to make something more stylized versus realistic, I can just do one solid continuous line versus like head, neck, arch of back, going around, rump, under, so there is a sort of logic to why you might just use one stroke versus a set of smaller strokes. If you're just doing exercises or even trying to start sketches for another editorial illustration, for instance, one thing that I often do is I'll start just with a mark and let that be my starting point and then go from there. And then I just sort of use my intuition to figure out what to do with the limbs, the head, and the neck and stuff like that. So if the people I'm drawing are wearing clothes, I can use different parts of their garb to break up the image to add interest. So cuffs, collars, boots, the line between the shirt where the shirt gets tucked into your pants, all those kinds of things can be cues of transitions from one body part to another, or a bending point. And so those are always fun ways of adding interesting parts to the people that I draw. So when you're drawing your characters, consider unlikely proportions like extra long limbs or disproportionate parts like really small head, giant hands, or a super high waist and a small torso. So play around with proportions. That's one way of getting loose in your drawing of people. Consider unlikely movements like drawing rubbery joints in arms and limbs instead of like actual bending joints, because our bones don't bend, but our body parts bend at the joint. But a way of loosening up is to kind of ignore this fact and just go with something a little bit more rubbery. So cast your logic and fear of being wrong out the door when you're doing this. If you're going to be loose, if you want to draw loose, you have to be loose. So use your sketchbook as a safe place to work these things out and give each new character that you draw a chance to become what it is, before giving up. So you're drawing, let's just say you just start drawing a person and you're like, oh, I don't like how this line went. Use that line and continue it. Look at it and oh, this could actually be like a really weird gesture, or this could be, you name it. Work with that mark and try and just finish what you started, even if it didn't take you where you thought it would go. Just take it to where it's taking you, if that makes sense. Have you ever played that game with your friends or someone where you kind of draw a squiggle and you have to turn that squiggle into something like whatever you see in it? It's like kind of like those ink blot tests that you see the butterfly in or whatever. That's kind of like making that first mark. Or if you're drawing someone and a person and it doesn't go the right way, you can kind of work with what's happening on the page and respond to it, and in that way you're kind of, yeah, responding to what you've drawn, rather than having a vision in your head that you're trying to execute. And that might be actually a huge thing about loosening up, is you might have in your head an idea or an expectation of how you should draw versus what's actually being drawn. And you have to just kind of, at least when you're sketching for personal reasons in your sketchbook where no one else is going to look, do away with those expectations and just work with what's coming out and try and respond to it. So I was saying, you cast your logic and fear of being wrong out the door, and you're using your sketchbook as a safe space to get these things out. Give each new character you draw a chance to become what it will be, and see how you feel about them right away. You might not feel great. Then see how you feel about it an hour later and a week later even. And come back to them, and you might look at it with different eyes. You probably will look at it with different eyes when you look at it a long time after the dust of your expectations settle, and you can look at it with fresh eyes. This actually is part of my practice when I'm drawing. I'll make a whole bunch of sketches for my concept, and then I know that I'm too judgy at that moment to really appreciate them, so I put them away and I look at them the next day or in an hour or whenever I can or have to. And I always see something in those first sketches that I didn't in the moment. So this is one way of at least allowing yourself just to be wrong, draw anyway, and then later you might start identifying actual stylistic things that you like about your work that you can then consciously apply to new drawings. And this is part of my next point. So look for patterns of in how you draw. Maybe you keep drawing people with round bodies, or you like doing a certain kind of eye, or you use shadow in a unique way, for instance. Once you become aware of these things, you try to leverage them as part of your style more consciously. Try drawing out multiple iterations of one person in various gestures or poses. So you just try drawing a person in a scenario like driving a car or a bike in different ways, maybe from the front, from the side, three-quarter view, about to hit a rock, getting chased by a squirrel. Whatever comes to your head, try and draw that. Commit to drawing each one of these little ideas out on the same page, and just have fun. Just have fun. Pretend you're 4 years old and you don't care what people think how it looks. And that can be just a fun way of getting it out. And if it helps, draw it in pencil and then later color it in with markers, just to add a layer of fun and personality to it. If you can, show a friend that you trust, whose opinion you trust, to see how they react to your drawings. So it's kind of like in comedy, if the audience laughs, the joke is actually funny. So you can kind of test your drawings with people if they relate, or if the illustration resonates with them in a way that they react to, and you can tell, or they tell you. That tells you a lot about how other people are perceiving your illustrations, and therefore how and what they communicate. So it's not a perfect system. Obviously, you want to draw for you, not for other people. But if you're communicating ideas through images and you want people to like your work, then showing people and to see if they react to it in a certain way is obviously going to be very helpful and useful, no matter how they react. So overall, this idea is about how to draw figures or characters in stylized ways. And this is one of the most sought after things by illustrators who are starting out. I think I already said this earlier, but I'm catching kind of a wave of people asking this and talking about it. And it feels like an emerging important theme right now. So for those interested and like to listen to podcasts, I just heard a great sub conversation about that in Michelle Condrich's podcast called Creative Playdate. Great podcast for illustrators, especially illustrators who, like me, have children, small children, young children, but the things they talk about go well beyond just having kids. And anyway, the most recent episode on Creative Playdate, she talks with Michael Byers, and there's a small conversation they have on the side just about that idea of stylizing characters and how to represent them abstractly or more literally. And a lot of the things that I've been talking about here, they kind of discuss from their point of view, which is great. So Chanel, thank you for your question, and thank you for your patience as I found time to answer it. And I hope this helps you in some way. I know it's not satisfying to just hear someone talk about drawing when a lot of this is so visual and could be shown and demonstrated. I would like to just let you guys know I am planning my next Skillshare class, and it's set to launch at the end of October or thereabouts. And let's just say some of the things I'm talking about here will be ending up in that class. Thank you guys for your patience as I have been slower publishing these videos. I really appreciate you guys watching, subscribing. If you like this video, please be sure to hit that thumbs up and even consider subscribing to the channel and telling your friends about it. This vidcast is all about answering your guys' questions, so whatever question you have about illustration, that's what this vidcast really is here for, and really my mission for, and my reason for spending the time to do this. So thanks guys for watching, asking questions. You can leave those questions in the comments, and I will be back in a future episode soon. If you don't hear from me for a while, it's probably because I'll be devoting any spare time that I have to recording my new Skillshare class, which, as you now know, I'm very excited about, and I will let you know more about that as it unfolds. So in the meantime, keep making great work and keep asking great questions. Thanks guys, have a great week.